I've finally done it. I bit the bullet and I bought myself a Masterclass subscription. I have been wanting to do this for years, and it just so happened that there was some budget in my work thing for education, and there's a whole bunch of sort of business strategy courses that I am going to be taking um, as like career development. But at the same time, since I have it, I have also been looking into the writing courses, and today I am going to give you a brief review of pros and cons of Shonda Rhimes' Masterclass for Writing Television. Now, let me start off by saying I have absolutely no interest in writing television. At least at this point, I'm not working on a pilot script or anything like that. But I have a theory that story is story, whatever medium you are telling it in, and that hearing other perspectives from different mediums can only enhance your own storytelling. And let's cut to the chase here. Let's be super. There's no suspense. It's a great masterclass. Her masterclass is long. It's 6 hours, and I binge watched it more or less over like 4 or 5 days. And I have gone back and listened to certain lessons, as I've also moved on to a couple of other creators. So here we go. Pros and cons of Shonda Rhimes' masterclass. And I'm trying to focus on the class and not the medium, but the medium things might sneak in there a little bit. So, pro number one, she is an incredibly engaging speaker. She speaks with such like power and a presence, and the stuff she's saying doesn't feel like fluff. The masterclass that I started after this one, it seemed to take a lot to get to the meat. I felt like there was a lot of fluff, there was a lot of rah, 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 and she is really in there, in depth, saying, for this character, we did da 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 da, and this is how you do this. And she's very like assertive with it, which I think is awesome. The next pro, I'm going to kind of intermingle them here, is the case studies. This course, you could just do the case studies. I mean, watch the whole thing, but the case studies are effing gold. She does a case study of the Grey's Anatomy pilot, which is in 2 parts, and then she does a case study of the Scandal pilot, which is in 5 parts, and which I just rewatched this morning. And they're done where there are other people in the room, so it's a different format than when she's just sitting on her chair talking to you, and they're her students kind of, and they're asking her questions, and they're going through it, they're dissecting, they have a sort of round table discussion, and it is gold. You hear her talk through the decisions that she made and why. Like in Scandal, we needed the Quinn character to be a surrogate for the audience. I decided to do this scene instead of this scene for XYZ. And all of the people in the room are really asking those why questions. And I think that can be even more valuable than hearing someone say, oh, make sure you show your characters and introduce them to the audience. But to hear her say, so I decided to have this situation first because I wanted to show the tone and I needed to show Olivia's character. And you get a sense of the goals she needs to accomplish as well as why she chose what she chose and how and blah, 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 blah. They are amazing. It's epic. I loved it. As I said, I've listened to those case studies probably 3 times. So good. A con here is the class guides are fairly useless. They have a summary of the different lessons. They're super long. For a summary, they're each a page, so it's like a long document. There's a take it further section for each lesson, which I find confusing because it's phrased as like, this is how you take it further, but it's stuff that she talked about in the lesson. I guess it's meant to also be a summary. It doesn't really add anything. Maybe that's the point. There's some notes pages that, I mean, I guess if you printed them off, you could use, but it's not like a con. It's just they're fairly useless. A pro, on the other hand, are the supplementary materials. She has a ton of supplementary materials, which I've seen is not always always the case for different master classes. You can read the pilots for Grey's Anatomy and for Scandal. For Scandal, I think there's a first draft and a second draft. She also has alternative opening scenes. She has her story Bible for Grey's. It is super good. Love it. Absolutely great. That is a great pro, are the supplementary materials. So interesting to read, and especially because she tells you, hey, you should watch a pilot you like and break down the script. It's cool to as someone who's not going to waste a ton of time to go find pilot scripts, considering I don't necessarily want to write television, to have those right there and be able to do the breakdown that she suggests, and also see how to do it through the case studies, it's amazing. Really, really cool. And I've never read a pilot script before, so it's super entertaining. Love it. Another con, it is super fast-paced. She talks fast, like me. I also talk fast, and I don't like to write notes while I'm listening to something. But if you want to be able to refer back and remember things, you probably want to write notes. So it's a con. It's if it's your style or not. Next, pro. Her talks about character. I think the episodes on character were sort of my second favorite after the case studies. She does a really interesting example where she talks about the different alcohol that her characters drink, and that's really useful. You hear a lot about, I think it's more in acting and any sort of character building, it's like, figure out what kind of cereal your character eats for breakfast. It's like, why will I use that? And I thought this was really a good example of how you can use details like that, like figure out what your character drinks, in a way that adds meaning to the character and isn't superfluous. She also made a really good point about how you need to empathize and love your villain. This was super relevant to me. I am working on developing the third draft of Some Kind of Criminal, my YA heist story, and I really haven't done much for the villain. But as she said that, I started getting some ideas of who my villain could be, and I was like, oh, I might really like her, so that's good. And she talks through that in examples and why it's so important that you empathize and see things from everyone's perspective, which is what we hear again a lot, but to hear it from her perspective and to hear her examples, really great. A con. I wish in the case study, as they do it, they're writing stuff on the whiteboard. And I did see in the class guide, there's like a chart to write stuff down. The problem being that class guide is on my computer, and I guess I could recreate it and write it down. But I just wish that they provided a copy of what was written on the whiteboard. This is a teeny tiny thing. Like, I was scratching the bottom of the barrel for cons here. That you kind of do miss getting to see the weaving that happened, and it just makes it a little bit harder for the student, the learner, the moi, to see the connections and to see the structure that she wants you to see with that exercise. Next, pro. I really enjoyed the audio style. I actually listened to most of this while I was on a coastal walk, so I listened to the audio version. Weirdly, you can't download this class. You can download others, but not this one. It's probably like a licensing thing. But my data worked, and I just walked along the coast and listened to it, and it was extraordinarily pleasant and very enjoyable. It was amazing. So, love that audio style. It's like listening to a podcast, but a lot more structured and guided. On the con side of that, I did have some technical issues with the audio player. The screen reader and the class got out of sync somehow. Like, I think it was reading the screens for a different lesson than the lesson I was actually listening to, because the screen reader would literally interrupt her in the middle of her sentence and say something like, choosing characters, and then she'd be like, and on the set, blah, 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 blah. So that was odd. But that's a Masterclass thing, not necessarily a Shonda Rhimes thing, but it was a little weird. And finally, pro is, even though I said I'm not super interested in TV writing, for people who are, she goes way into it. She talks about being a showrunner. She talks about how things work, being on a set. It's super cool. I love to hear about how media and TV and movies and all that kind of stuff works. Even though I'm not necessarily interested right now in working in it, I thought that was so cool. And yeah, it's just like a peek behind the curtain. I will also add, as like a kind of con, if you don't like Grey's and or have not seen Grey's, and if you don't like Scandal and or have not seen Scandal, you probably need to watch those first to get the most out of this class. Grey's was actually not so bad. Like, if you haven't watched it and you don't know that spoiler alert, Derek dies. Like there are spoilers throughout. I had actually not watched Scandal, so I watched the first episode of this masterclass, and then I was like, oh wow, I really need to watch Scandal. I'm now on season 2, but there are spoilers. Like she fully dissects episode 301. And so I think you have to have watched like the first 2 and a bit seasons of Scandal to get the most, or even the first 3 seasons of Scandal to get the most out of this, to really understand like the context, especially because she really, really analyzes episode 301. Knowing what came before it and after it, I think would enhance it. And maybe most people have watched that show. I just never got in the bandwagon. It's also super dark, and so I find myself skipping over bits. Like there are episodes where I'm like, this is horrible. I'm going on a tangent here, but like it is intense. So if you don't like intense things with a lot of murder and sadness, not that it's the whole show, but like it is parts of the show. Either like maybe skip the masterclass or just go off of it with knowing that like watch the pilot and watch 301 and just be like, that's enough for me. Or just like have some stand-up comedy on standby, so when you finish watching an episode of Scandal, you can recover. So overall, I really enjoyed my first masterclass. I'm listening to Judy Blume's now. I will do a review of that, although I'm not loving it as much as Shonda's. It's taking a while to get into the dirt of things. I'm also not as familiar with Judy Blume's work, so I think that is a factor. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know, have you seen her masterclass? Have you done other masterclasses that you would recommend we check out? Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.